Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're going to be starting a very fun project. I'm going to be sewing up the Heather Blazer by Friday Pattern Company. I recently have been borderline obsessed with blazers. It all started when I bought a blazer for my work wardrobe, not knowing if I'd wear it that much, and I wear it all the time, and I feel so cool and so chic when I'm wearing that blazer. And so I kind of got thinking, why not try to sew my own? And I chose the Friday Pattern Company Heather Blazer pattern because I've heard it's a great option for beginners who haven't done a lot of tailoring projects, so that's me. It's a more relaxed style of blazer. It's not quite as structured and tailored as other blazers. It's kind of a loose modern take on a blazer. I like the look of the design because it's pretty long and it's got that oversized look, but it's not so oversized that I think it would look sloppy or anything like that. It's that perfect, chic, oversized vibe. And beyond just the pattern, I think what's going to make this project really special is the fabric. So the fabric I picked up for this project is a gorgeous yarn dyed cotton, and it's extra special because it's actually a vintage textile. It's one of a kind. I bought it from a seller on Etsy, and she sources vintage textiles from all over China. This particular one came from a region in East China, which I'm not even going to try to pronounce. I'll put it in the description box. And the seller actually put a little bit of information about this fabric in the description. Basically, it's a hand-woven cotton textile, and it's made of hand-spun yarns. So that gives some natural unevenness and texture to the textile that you wouldn't see in modern pieces, which I think is really cool. So because this is actually a vintage textile, it's very narrow. So this is the full width of the fabric right here. And that's because the width of this fabric was limited to the width of the loom that it was handcrafted on, which again, I think is really cool and gives it some fun character. So because it is so narrow, I got a lot. I think I got 9 or 10 yards to make sure I'd have enough, which is, the equivalent of like 4 or 5 yards of a more modern fabric that's at least double this width or sometimes triple this width. And when this fabric first arrived, it did have a lot of age spots. It was very brown and discolored and dingy. And I worked really hard at soaking it. I use a vintage textile soak, which really works well at lifting age-related stains in fabric. And the fabric came out beautifully. It looks so bright now. You'd still know it's a heritage textile from the unique weaving style, but it no longer has those brown age spots anymore, which I just think is really great. I'm super happy it came out so well. It was a little bit on the expensive side, but I honestly fell in love with it from the moment I saw it, and I love anything antique, vintage, anything with little character, and knowing that someone spun all these vintage threads by hand and then wove this by hand on a loom is incredible. I feel really lucky to be able to work with something as interesting as this. I'll put a link in my description box below to the shop I bought this from. She has tons of vintage textile options if you're ever interested. And then to go with that beautiful cotton, I picked up some cotton poplin lining fabric. I got this from Blackbird Fabrics because I was already placing an order there to get some other fabrics. If you haven't seen my recent fabric haul video, I'll link it above. But I just chose this because it's a nice tightly woven cotton. It's smooth and cool to the touch, and I thought it would be a pretty good match for my fabric. So side by side, you can see they're a pretty decent match, which is awesome. Lastly, the other ingredients for a successful blazer is interfacing. So I did pick up some interfacing here. Firstly, I got some weft fusible interfacing. I really fell in love with weft interfacing when I made my Oslo coat recently. Again, if you haven't seen that video, I'll link it for you. But what this interfacing does, weft interfacing has a wonderful drape to it. So sometimes, have you ever interfaced a project and it's taken away all the character of the fabric? It doesn't drape well anymore. Well, weft interfacing really helps with that. It helps maintain the drape of a fabric, which is great. And it is classically used in coats. I don't know if it's as classically used in blazers, but I thought it would be a good choice. And then interestingly, this pattern also calls for some stretch interfacing as well. I picked up this stretch interfacing as well. I got both my interfacings from Blackbird Fabrics simply because I was already placing an order there, and I also wanted to try to find a good supplier of high quality interfacing, so I thought I'd try theirs out. They seem nice so far, but we'll see what they're like when I actually start using them. I honestly don't know why we need 2 different types of interfacing to make a blazer, but I guess I'm about to learn when I start making this project. Okay guys, I've got all the supplies I need, pattern, fabrics, interfacing, everything's ready to go, and I'm just dying to get started on this project, so let's jump in now. Okay, so to start out, I'm cutting out all of my main fabric pieces and lining pieces, and there's separate lining pieces to the main body of the blazer. When I first saw this pink plaid fabric, I thought it would be a fun opportunity to try to pattern match my plaid so that I got a smooth look across the jacket. But as I started to cut it out, I quickly noticed that because this fabric was hand woven, it has lots of imperfections and the pattern isn't actually repeating at all. Each individual block of the pattern is slightly different than all of the other patterns, so I knew that that would make pattern matching impossible. At first I was disappointed about this, but I think the overall effect still turned out really nice. When all was said and done, I had absolutely no extra fabric left, so I'm really lucky that I got everything cut out right. This pattern also called for 2 types of interfacing. I used woven interfacing for the front, under collar, and back pieces, and I used knit interfacing for the front facing and upper collar pieces. So first I started working on the pocket pieces. I pressed the upper edge of the pocket under at about 1/4 inch towards the wrong side of the fabric. Then I flipped the upper edge of the pocket down, right sides together, and pressed at the notches, and stitched down the sides of the pocket hem, and I kept that 1/4 inch pressed up. Then clip your corners and flip this the right sides out, which will give a neat finish along the top of the pocket. Then you can press the raw edges of the pocket 3/8 of an inch under all the way around, and then edge stitch along the top folded edge. And you're going to want to do this process for both pockets. Once your pockets have been prepped, you can use the markings on the front of the blazer to line up your pockets neatly, and then you want to top stitch your pockets in place all the way around the pockets, leaving the top open. Moving on to the main body of the jacket, you want to sew the back pieces right sides together, matching up the notches. And when you're done, press the seam open. Next, pin the front pieces of the blazer to the back piece right sides together along the shoulder seam. And then you'll want to sew this and press your seam open. Then I've pinned the back piece to the front pieces along the side seam, matching the notches, and sewed the side seam at each side of the blazer. Next it's time to work on the sleeves. So grabbing my upper sleeve piece, I sewed 2 lines of gathering stitches along the upper edge of the upper sleeve between the marked notches. Then place the upper sleeve and lower sleeve pieces right sides together and sew along each of the side seams matching the notches. And then press your seams open. Next, we want to use the gathering stitches we made in the sleeve to ease our sleeve into the arm side, making sure to match the notches. So I recommend to take your time here and gather up the top edge of the sleeve, which will sit on top of your shoulder carefully so that it's the same length as the top of the arm side, using the notches as your guide. Once you've done this, you can pin your sleeve into your arm side right sides together, and I would recommend to baste your sleeve first, check and make sure it looks nice, and then if you're happy with how it looks, you can go back and sew a second line of stitches at a regular stitch length. So next I'm grabbing my under collar piece, and this piece should be interfaced with woven interfacing. You want to sew these pieces right sides together along the center seam and then press the seam open. Next, we need to attach this under collar piece to our jacket. Pin the upper collar piece to the main jacket right sides together as I'm showing. You have notches and circles to help you match up these 2 pieces. And again, I would recommend to pin carefully here and take your time stitching it together to get a neat finish. And the instructions here recommend that when you take this to your sewing machine, you sew it together with the under collar side facing up. Once you've sewn these 2 pieces together, you can carefully clip into the seam allowance at the collar to allow you to press this seam open. With that step done, we have the shell of our jacket ready to go, made of the outer or main fabric, and now it's time to work on the lining. So to start on the lining, pin the front facing piece to the side front lining piece, matching up the notches right sides together, And then you want to start sewing from the top of this piece and stop sewing at the lower notch, so you're leaving open a little bit at the bottom of the seam. And as always, I'm pressing my seam open at every step, and I've been using my tailor's clapper to help me get a nice, neat finish on the seams. Next, sew the back lining pieces right sides together along the back seam, but here you're going to want to leave a large section in the middle open between the two marked notches. And this is important because we're going to turn our jacket out to the right side at the very end through this opening and then hand sew it closed, so don't forget to leave a little opening there. Now, similarly to how we assembled the main jacket, we're going to assemble the rest of the lining. So I'm placing my front lining piece, which has been made up of the front facing as well as the lining fabric, right sides together against that back lining piece. We need to attach the shoulder seams right sides together as well as the side seams right sides together. Next, I'm assembling the sleeve linings in the same manner to the main jacket. I'm attaching the upper and lower lining pieces right sides together, pressing my seams open and making sure to sew my 2 rows of gathering stitches along the top of the sleeves so that I can ease them in to the main body of the lining. Next, I need to attach my upper collar to my lining piece. The upper collar piece was cut on the straight grain and it was interfaced with knit interfacing. So similarly to what we did before, we're attaching the upper collar pieces right sides together, pressing the seam open, and then we need to pin our upper collar piece right sides together against our main lining piece, matching the notches and the circles. At this step, I also took a minute to add my Made by Mel clothing label into the lining of my jacket. At this point, we have a shell of the jacket made out of the main fabric, and we have a second shell of the jacket made out of the lining fabric. So now it's time for the fun part. We get to place the main jacket and the lining fabric right sides together and sew them together at the collar. And then we're sewing all along the perimeter of those collar pieces to start. In this step, we want to stitch all the way to the circle that we previously marked and try not to go beyond it. Next, we're pushing that seam allowance out of the way, and this time we're going to stitch around the lapel and down the front of the jacket, these pieces right sides together. In this case, you want to start right at that circle that we marked where we stopped sewing in the last step. Next, we need to clip the corners of the collars that we just sewed together so that when we turn it out, we get a nice pointy finish. And the pattern instructions also suggest to grade the main fabric side of the lapel down to about a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And you want to do this all the way down to the notch on the center front seam, as this signals the lapel break. So grade your seam all the way down to that lapel break line. So next we'll work on the hem of the sleeves. So we want to press the main fabric sleeve hem under at about 1 3/8 inch, which is about 3.5 centimeters. Next, we want to pull the sleeve lining piece over top of that main fabric sleeve hem that we just pressed, matching up the raw edges of the sleeve hems. We want to pin around there so that the sleeve seams match up, and be careful that your sleeves aren't twisted. Then we want to stitch around the edge of the sleeve hem at our normal seam allowance. Finally, we want to secure our sleeve hem so they don't get droopy. You'll just want to tack down the seam allowance part of the main sleeve where it meets the seams on the main fabric of the sleeve. So you're just stitching that hem allowance to the seam allowance of the main sleeve by hand with a couple little stitches just so it stays in place. And this is what it should look like when you're done. Next, we'll work on the bottom hem. You want to press up the hem of the main fabric under at 1 3/8 inch or 3.5 centimeters. To the wrong side of the fabric. Then you want to press the lining under at a 3/4 inch. So this portion is pressed up at 1 3/8 of an inch. This portion is pressed up at 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch, and the lining is pressed up at 3/4 of an inch or about 2 centimeters. So now what we want to do is grab our lining fabric and place it against the raw edge of the main fabric, and sew all the way from the corner to the folded edge of the facing. And here you can see I'm just pinning the lining to the main jacket fabric all the way along the body of the jacket. This step was a little bit hard for me to explain, so if you're confused about the hemming process, I suggest you go watch Friday Pattern Company's video tutorial about how to sew this blazer. I'm going to leave it linked in the comments below. Then I'll sew this together at our normal seam allowance. And once I'm done, I'm going to sew those tacking stitches of that hem to the seam allowance of the main body of the jacket, as you can see here. Now, before you have the fun experience of turning out your blazer to the right side, you can make sure that you tack your lining fabric to your main fabric. You can either tack the seam allowances together, or you can sew a small strip of fabric to both the main jacket seam allowance and the lining seam allowance to allow for a little bit of mobility to make sure it doesn't move around too much. When it is time to turn out your jacket to the right side, you're going to very carefully do this through the hole that you left in the center back of the lining part of your jacket. I also decided it would be fun to top stitch my jacket, so I tried unsuccessfully to get a neat finish a couple times, but what ended up working out well for me was using my 1/4 inch stitching foot so I could get a nice neat finish using that foot. I also used pink top stitching thread that was very fluffy, so it had a nice finish, and I lengthened my stitch length a little bit, and I found that that combination of factors gave me a neat finish. Once I was satisfied with my jacket, I hand sewed the hole in the back lining piece together using some hand stitches. And finally, I made my button and buttonhole. As always, I did a test buttonhole first, and then I did my real buttonhole on my main fabric. I got these really cute vintage buttons from a seller on Etsy, and I think they match my jacket perfectly. I decided to go with one main button and buttonhole on the front, which is what the original pattern suggests to do, and then I also added 3 smaller decorative buttons to each sleeve just for a little bit of fun. Alright guys, with all that said, the blazer is finally done and it's time for the reveal. Okay guys, so here is the finished result. This is my Friday Pattern Company Heather blazer, and I'm so happy with how this blazer turned out. So first of all, let's talk about the fit of this blazer. So I made my blazer in a size medium, and it's definitely an oversized fit, which is true to what the envelope describes. I think for me, this does toe the line between being a little bit oversized and then simply being too big and boxy. I think mine turned out a little bit more boxy than I was hoping for. So if I was to make it again, I would make it in the size small. It is partially my fault. If I wanted a perfect fit, I should have made a mock-up first, but I just dove right into the project without doing any fit modifications. The size medium is also very wide in the shoulders, and again, this could be a design idea because they want it to be a bit oversized, but I really like when blazers fit well in the shoulders but then are maybe a bit more relaxed in the body area, whereas because this is a little bit big in the shoulders and a little bit boxy in the body area, I think it contributes to it just feeling a little bit large overall. This fabric also has little to no drape, so I think that contributes to it looking a little bit boxy, and there's really not a lot of waist definition in this blazer. There's a little bit of a curve at the waist, but nothing too drastic, so even when it's buttoned up, it still has that loose look. So in terms of the fit, I would say on the whole, I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. It's definitely wearable, but if I was to make it again, I would definitely go at least one size down, and I may even take out a little bit of width in the midsection as well, just to create a little bit of a slimmer look. So in terms of the fabric I chose, I'm really happy with how this pink plaid fabric looks. As I mentioned in the beginning of the video, this is a really special vintage fabric that was hand woven, so it had a lot of character to it. The only thing I will say about this fabric is because it was hand woven, the repeating pattern of the plaid is not actually repeating at all. It's almost a very random pattern. So at first glance, it looks like it's the same pattern repeating, but once I went to cut it, I noticed that it differed slightly in each kind of block. So I wasn't able to pattern match perfectly. At first I was a little bit upset I wouldn't be able to pattern match, but I actually really like how it turned out. I think it gives it like a fun, eclectic look. And you can kind of see this better illustrated in the back. Like for example, this seam lines up perfectly, but then the next seam up doesn't line up because the fabric wasn't actually woven in a regular manner. It was kind of woven in an irregular manner. In terms of the finishing, I decided to do the 1 button and 1 buttonhole on the front, which is what the original pattern suggests to do. I was thinking of playing around with doing 3 buttons or kind of doing some faux buttons, but I decided just to leave it alone. And then just for fun, I added this triple button detail on the sleeve. So you'll notice a lot of high-end blazers, the sleeve will actually kind of overlap, and you can use these buttons to unbutton the sleeve or button it up to get a tighter or looser finish. Of course, my sleeve doesn't actually open, but I thought this was just a fun detail to have the 3 buttons on both sleeves anyways, just to give it a bit of fun. And in terms of this lining fabric, if you remember, this is 100% cotton poplin lining fabric, and I wanted to kind of try using this instead of using a silky lining fabric to see how it would go. Many of you might know that most blazers are traditionally lined with a silky feeling fabric, and that's so that they can slip on and off your body more easily, especially if you have something underneath like a sweater. But I have a personal vendetta against those silky fabrics. I hate the way they feel against my body. They make me feel sweaty and sticky and disgusting. So I wanted to try using a cotton fabric which feels more comfortable against the skin and see how it would work for the lining. And I honestly love how the cotton lining feels. It still slides on and off really easily, and for me, I don't plan to do a lot of sweater wearing under this blazer anyway, so I don't foresee any issues with being able to slide it on or off. I feel so comfortable with that cotton lining against my skin, and it's a nice tight woven cotton, so it still has a nice crisp, smooth look for the lining. So I'd say overall the lining was a huge success. So my thoughts on the pattern itself and the process of sewing the pattern. I think this is a great beginner pattern. It was my first time trying to sew a blazer, and this pattern is great because it has really nice written instructions, but it also has a full detailed YouTube tutorial that shows you every single step you need to do. I thought every step was really clear to me. There was no point in the process where I was unsure of what I was supposed to be doing. And I also like the method for installing the lining, which you ended up sewing the lining to the main fabric right sides together, leaving a slit in the center back of the lining. Then you turn or bag out the lining and get everything turned to the right side out, and then you can hand stitch that center seam of the lining closed. And when I went ahead and bagged out my blazer, it looked really neat and tidy. The hems were really crisp and everything came together really nicely, so I was pretty happy with that overall. Another detail I added was the pink top stitching, which goes along the inside of the front pieces, and it goes all the way around the collar and the back of the neckline. One thing I wish I had done differently with this pattern would be to interface the pockets. You're doing a lot of interfacing in this blazer, and I ended up interfacing all of my main fabric pieces to give them that nice stiff look, but you weren't instructed to interface your pockets. I was thinking in the back of my head if I should interface the pockets to help them stay looking crisp over time, but I didn't end up doing it, but I wish I did. I feel like the jacket stays looking crisp because of the interfacing, so it's very apparent that the pockets aren't interfaced and they just get wrinkly more easily. So next time I make this pattern, I will definitely interface my pockets to help them look neat and tidy. So overall, this was a super fun project. My first time making a blazer. I think it was overall a good success. I think this blazer will be so fun to add a bit of personality to an outfit. I've already worn it a bit with jean shorts or blue jeans and just a plain white top. I think I could also wear it to work, maybe with black pants and a black top as kind of like a fun piece to wear to work. And I just think I'm going to get a lot of wear out of it in this late summer period as we're transitioning from summer to fall. In terms of would I make this pattern again, I definitely think I will. I might not make it for a little while, and I think the next time I make it, I might make it in a plain linen fabric, kind of like they have on the cover of the pattern itself. Because as much as I love this pink check blazer, it might be practical to make something a little bit more wearable for every day, maybe like an emerald green linen or something like that. That's the type of piece that I could picture throwing on at work or going out as just another little layer for the fall and winter. So we'll see if I end up making another one anytime soon. All right, thank you so much for watching, guys. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you like what I'm doing on my channel, please subscribe. I would love to have you here. I have a couple more fun sewing videos coming up for the end of summer, and then we're going to dive right into some fall sewing. So if that sounds good to you, please stick around. Okay guys, I'll see you in the next one. Bye.